now it's at 1080p. Enjoy to your heart's content.
Okay, thanks. That was great. I hope that the quality didn't detract from people following the conversation. But right, we've got about 15 minutes probably for some discussion. There's already been some comments which we could maybe come back to in the chat, or if you've got any questions, you can always raise your hand as well. I might just actually start with a question. I think it relates to a comment as well about the news today about the UK guidance from the Law Commission. So I noticed on your last slide you were talking about companies taking responsibility. If I've understood it correctly, one of the things in that guidance today was that if the vehicle's classed as self-driving, then the manufacturer has to be responsible for any unsafe or illegal behavior of the vehicle. I was just wondering what your thoughts on how whether the organizations are ready for that kind of responsibility, and how that might affect maybe what they do in the future.
Since I just finished breakfast, I haven't read the report as the rest of you have. But I did. I was one of the people they chatted to, so I'm generally familiar with where they were going. The question of who to sue is complicated. So because I'm seeing how that's playing out in Pennsylvania, so I'll sort of go there. But the important thing is, if you're a vulnerable road user, if you're a pedestrian who doesn't even have auto insurance, and if you're injured, who pays the bills? You need an insurance company to go to, and you may not have your own insurance. So this is huge. Just knowing who it is and not having to go through a 5-year court procedure before you collect the first penny, but you're out of pocket, that's huge. It's got to be taken care of. Saying it's the manufacturer is certainly seems like a reasonable option. At least now you know who to go after. If there's an issue, their insurance, or if the insurance can't or won't pay, to go after whoever's the company themselves. That's great. It's going to be complicated. What's going to happen, because what if a car company sells a car to somebody who adds a computer to it, an ADS, automated driving system, to it, who's a different company, and then they take that company and they provide it to an independent contractor who's on a mobility network. Okay, and that contractor then fails to update the software, or doesn't clean the camera, or doesn't maintain it. This is just going to be a mess in practice. But what I care about is that the potential victim has an easy job of being made whole, and the companies are going to have to figure it out. So I think what the net effect is, the manufacturer has been put in charge of figuring it out, more than they're the ones who are going to be stuck holding the bag, right? But that's okay, because they have the resources, and the poor individuals in the public streets don't. That's sort of how I see it. So I think it's somewhat arbitrary choice. As long as there's someone, it's great, and then they have to have the resources to figure out the rest.
Can I just raise something, Phil, with that? Is that there's currently car owners are responsible for the maintenance of their vehicles.
Yes.
So it's not the manufacturer who's responsible for the maintenance. So if the brakes,
there's a reason I went there. Yeah, there's a reason I went there.
to go wrong, the owner is expected to fix it, but the owner won't know on how individual sensors are performing and whether they're not working correctly, and whether it's possible one of those sensors may lead to, a poor diagnostic in the machine learning component.
Yeah.
So how does it work? How can the machine, how can the car driver know that the machine is working as it should?
Well, there's two ways that goes. I mentioned moral crumple zone in the talk. Let me make sure everyone's heard this one. I'm sure some of you have, but let's make sure everyone's heard this one. Moral crumple zone is where you say, we're going to put a person we're going to associate a person with this machine. And the point of the person is to absorb the blame for when the machine makes a mistake, right? And where you're going ends up kind of in that territory. So it's just always important to be mindful of that. Now, to more specifically address your question, the owner isn't going to know unless there's a service alert, right? So there's going to have to be an expectation. In practice, you're going to have to divide up expectation and say, well, the car shouldn't be operated unless the owner does some service. They refill the washer tank So there's liquid to wash the bug splat off the cameras, because the cameras can't do that. The manufacturer can't do that, right? But on the other hand, has anyone in the audience ever driven a car more than a kilometer with one of the warning lights on? You don't have to answer,
Many times.
Right. Okay. And I've been in so many Ubers with the yellow light on, and
Yep.
I've gotten desensitized, right? So now, if you kill a pedestrian, do you go to jail because you didn't do the yellow light? That's an interesting question, right? So because we know how people behave. So it may be that the car has to manage itself, and the manufacturer has to make sure that any possible maintenance, that if it's not done, the car won't go. Okay. And then if the person does it, it can go. So there's an interesting question, how much you expect of the human, but there's another model that may also work. It may be like owning a private plane. Okay. You can buy a private jet. It isn't like you're going to change the oil yourself, right? So it may be that you buy a car, but you also, in order to operate it in autonomous mode, you have to buy a service contract. And the service contract folks are responsible for the periodic checks and everything like that. There are a bunch of ways this goes. You're absolutely right. This is an issue. And the last thing we want is drivers being blamed for stuff that is not reasonably under their control. That's the huge principle.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Right. Matt Osborne's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, thanks, Phil. Very interesting. I hope you don't mind. It's a question that's not necessarily related to the subject of the presentation, but it's come out from it.
Richard, I'll answer if I can.
Thank you. And it is a very much an opinion one, I guess. Richard and I are very interested in the research in the area of the safety of decision-making of autonomous systems in general. And I'm just wondering, did you have any inkling from the data you've read and come across that would indicate whether the causal factors in some of the autonomous vehicle incidents were understanding or perception failures, or whether it was a subsequent decision made by the autonomous system that led to the crash? I
saw a talk last week at IFIP Working Group 10.4. So theoretically, that talk will eventually get published from them, IFIP WG 10.4. And they'd done an analysis, and they said it was sort of some of each. It was mixed bag. They'd gone through the California data, and there were a few perception. It was all over the map. It wasn't just one thing. Okay, will you say that was more down to the analysis trawling the data? Well, getting to the root cause, perhaps. It's the things. Okay, it's the things that got reported to California as the fault of the vehicle. Now, there is extraordinary incentive to blame everything on someone else if you can, if you're reporting that data. So it is certainly not free from bias, at least in my opinion, right? But even though, after all those filters of trying to report the least you can report to look good, and that, hey, that's a business incentive. They're incentivized to do that. I get it. It is what it is. It's not academic data. But even after that, if you laid out all the bins, there were a non-zero number of crashes in every single bin, and perception was one, path planning was one, all that stuff. But it's not my data, so that's just what I happen to know. So no, that's not a surprise. And I guess the issue that arises from that, if you would now need to attribute blame for a crash, and you're not the integrator as a legal term of that vehicle, do you pursue, say, the LiDAR developer or the person or the team that wrote the algorithm that supports it? Well, we already have that issue with automotive. So if there's an allegation of unintended acceleration, I was involved in the Toyota trials way back, but now people are saying maybe Tesla has that problem. I don't know. We'll see, right? But let's say someone sues a car company for that. Well, the car company might well not have written the code. Maybe Tesla did, but Toyota didn't. They used Denso, right? And so depending on the state law, it turns out, or the federal law, or the country you live in, you sue the car company for recovery, or you sue the car company and you name everyone in the supply chain 5 levels deep, or something in between. At some point, the lawyers basically make it's more of a cost benefit or return on investment kind of decision to decide who to sue. It's more like that, okay? But in principle, especially I'm led to understand by a lawyer in Pennsylvania, it's really crazy. You could sue everyone. So who knows, right?
I guess that-
could an engineer get a call in the middle of the night? Well, we might end up there. That's unusual because they want to go after the companies with a lot of resources to compensate the victim. There's a practical limit, but it's hard to know how that's going to turn out.
I'll
Right
stop
now,
there,
the
thank
laws, the laws are very unclear about that right now. And frankly, in Pennsylvania, the AV companies, the bill that they seem to have written that's going through the Senate right now is so opaque. It's like, I read that, I have no idea. I talked to a lawyer friend, he has no idea who to sue. I mean, yeah. Oh, by the way, in about an hour, they're supposed to introduce an amendment that may or may not fix this. We'll see. So this is like real time on the fly. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, not holding breath. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Zoe, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, thanks ever so much for that. I really, really enjoyed it. This may be an unfair question, but
It wouldn't be the first. I deal with a lot of, issues.
But you raised the deployment governance question as who decides it's time to deploy and based on what.
Yeah.
And some of the answers were in your presentation, but I just wondered what you think the answer is in terms of who decides and based on what. Like what would be the key criteria that you think matter? Sure.
It's complicated because there will be less certainty than anyone would like as to how safe it actually is before it deploys, because it's immature technology, and it is what it is. But too many people use that as an excuse. Well, we can't have perfect knowledge, so there's no point trying. It's like, oh, come on, you can do better than that. So I would like to see adherence to existing industry written standards. They're not a perfect solution. And the part about they're not a perfect fit, well, you could say that about the clothing you wear, but does that mean you're not going to wear it? Come on, right? They're good enough. They're certainly good enough. And all of them have the ability to be tailored to meet the needs. So follow the standards. And I gave the laundry list of standards in the talk. And even industry and governments are all saying, here are the standards. In Europe, there may be slightly different standards, but there'll be a different ISO standard instead of 4600, whatever. Follow the standard. They're not going to be perfect. They're not going to cover everything, but why would you not at least try, right? That's part one. Part two is you're probably going to have to be safer than an unimpaired human driver. Not because you need to be dramatically safer to deploy. A few percent safer might be okay, but the problem is, oh, I'm 10% safer, plus or minus 50%. How does that work? So you probably need to be a lot safer than a human to make sure that the reasonable confidence interval is safer than a human. And you're going to have really a lot of field feedback that if you get a leading indicator of a problem, you get a near miss on a pedestrian, you don't wait for a hit to fix it. You have to be much more proactive than the industry typically is on field feedback. You can't wait for the deaths and injuries to accumulate as NHTSA had to do before they could call out Tesla on the emergency vehicles. So if you do those things, I think it'll probably be okay. There's still some risk, but you have to at least be responsible about the risk.
Thanks.
Okay.
And in terms, sorry, could I just, Ibrahim's got his hand up very quickly.
You finish, yeah.
Safer than a human driver, safer than the average human driver, safer than the best human driver.
Oh, a book could be written about it. I'm 75,000 words in.
Okay.
But let me give you the simple answer. You need the safer than a human driver is the European Ethics Committee or German Ethics Committee. I'm sorry, I don't remember which, but there's the ethics thing. You're nodding your head. You've read it, right? Okay.
Yeah. I think it's the German one.
But there's the numerator and there's the denominator, and the denominator is the tough thing, right? So I would say you have to consider at least the following. Do you really want to be safer than a buzzed 16-year-old, who just had severe? No, I don't think so, right? So I would say safer than an unimpaired human driver. Mm-hmm. Some people would go so far as to say at least as safe as an expert human driver, right? But even then, you see this with some of the Tesla data, you can't use national averages because I have a different 100-slide multi-hour marathon talk for anyone who cares, right? And one of the slides is about exactly this question. And what I found out, there's a factor of 3 to 7 times difference from state to state in the US on different metrics. And for zip code to zip code, postal code to postal code, it gets even worse. So, you're looking at 10-to-1 fatality rate differences by moving over a little bit geographically. So it's not reasonable to drive around in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, which is the most benign environment imaginable, and say that predicts my safety in Pittsburgh. It's not going to happen. Or say, well, I'm safer in Arizona than the drivers are in Pittsburgh. And by the way, there's ice on the roads today. So it has to be a very granular statement of how drivers are behaving in the same conditions for that to be even viable, and you still have the uncertainty issue. We only drive at day when there's no precipitation, and we're comparing ourselves to national averages. That makes no sense, right? So there's a lot of, did I mention I've written 75,000 words on this? You get the idea. It's a very hard topic, it turns out.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Ibrahim?
Yes, as always, thanks, Phil, for a great talk. So you mentioned standards as a key component of your answer, but also you mentioned the culture, especially for California-based companies.
Yeah.
And we know great standards in poor cultures, they're useless because people can easily come up with paper-based safety. Just you need me to meet the letter of the standard. Here are some consultants which will give you the what you need, but little will change given that the issue is largely cultural. These many of those companies are risk takers, while in their aerospace, the culture is risk averse. That's why in large part standards work, not because the standards are good. What do you think?
Okay, I'll give you the slightly funny answer, then I'll give you the serious answer. ANSI 4600 requires a strong safety culture, so you must be fine, right? More importantly, actually, I'm kind of serious with that you're required to track metrics and report on the safety culture, right? So the incentives are all there if a company actually wants to do the right thing. If they're dead set on not doing the right thing, no standard will fix that. I completely agree with you, right? But the way I look at it is, it's in their economic interest long-term to maintain trust. The airlines got to where they are because people are averse to plane crashes on the news, right? And since the AV crashes are showing up on the news, there's some incentive there. The reason I'm doing this whole talk about trust is because you see the dichotomy between we need trust and the activities. So I think long-term, and I hope nearer term, the companies will decide that they need to be seen to be doing the right thing and to actually do the right thing. And the standards give them the road to get there, but they have to make the choice to go down the road. I absolutely agree with you.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, Dimitar?
Yeah, hello. Just a quick question. Do you think that the needs of autonomous vehicles are actually driving progress in explainable machine learning, or do you see the field just as users of whatever comes your way?
I'm sure that there are people in the industry working on that. I'm not directly familiar with who in details. I would think they're working on that, but it's not something I hear them talking about as central to their strategy. It's much more of a big data type thinking. We'll throw the data at it. It'll get better when the data says it's working. It's working. That's what I see more of.
Okay, so is there any more questions? Mike, is that a hand?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's a real hand.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Great talk. Can I just ask about your view about kind of distribution of risk? Because basically, obviously, AVs may be risky for certain road users and not for others. Do you think we should always try and reduce the risk for all categories, or can we distribute risk?
That would also be in the big chunk of text I'm writing, but I'm happy to give you the short version. Yeah, risk distribution is huge. Just as a thought experiment, if you reduce the number of road fatalities by half, it's only killing 20,000 a year in the US instead of 40,000, but every one of them is a child who's a pedestrian, that's not going to work out, right? And so in addition to what do you mean by safe, I think it has to be per category. I think if there's an identifiable demographic that ordinary people can realize is a defined group, whatever that means, it's very difficult, right? and that their fatality rate or injury rate goes up, even though everyone else goes down, you're going to hear an issue. Now, we've already seen this. Right now, NHTSA has decided that the way to go after improving safety of things they may be concerned with, and it's an investigation, not a conclusion, is killing emergency workers at roadway crashes on high-speed highways is not okay. And the investigation is not completed, but if they were to investigate and find, for example, so this is hypothetical, all the lawyers listening can, it's hypothetical. If they were to find out that Tesla on autopilot hits roadside emergency vehicles 10 times more often than any other type of car, that's going to have to be fixed. And so you bring up an excellent point. It's going to have to be addressed. So, safe enough, like I said before, it's really complicated. That you have to be safer than a human. You can be better than a human in some cases, but making up for it by being worse somewhere else is going to be problematic. Engineers, well, it's half the number of people. What's your problem? And then you go, well, let's look at who's suffering. There's also an economic discrimination issue. That, for example, this is brought up for the Pennsylvania bill. If you're doing all your testing in low-income neighborhoods because you know that it's going to be harder for them to sue you for a loss, probably that's not okay. It's a very complicated social problem on top of the technical problem. So thanks for bringing that up.
Cheers.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, so I feel like we probably could carry the discussion on for a while, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up. So just like to thank Phil again for a really great talk and stimulating some great discussion as well. So we'll share that link to the YouTube video if you want to see that again, and we'll try and put the recording of the discussion on available as well. So yeah, so thanks a lot for your time, Phil. It's been great.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Thanks,
Great
Phil.
questions. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Phil.